Hey Paul, tell me about a client who kept getting outbid on apartment complexes. What did she change?
We had a client who spent a bunch of time looking for 100 and 200 unit apartment complexes, and she kept getting outbid by big hedge funds. They were just paying more than she could afford to offer. After joining our community, she adjusted her tactics to target these 15 to 50 unit apartment complexes and targeting people who own the property for a long time and are likely open to taking owner financing. And she was able to get 2 different properties under contract and close, and she added 44 units to her portfolio. In both scenarios, no banks involved. I think one of them was 4% interest and the other one was 3% interest from the seller. So a lot of people ask, why would a seller be willing to take a 3 or 4% interest rate when bank rates are higher? And it's because they're not banks, and you can negotiate with a person in a way that you can't with a bank. That's the reason we love seller financing so much. And the reason this works for this like mid-grade multifamily property is because you're dealing with a mom and pop owner instead of this like big institutional seller, and you're not competing with big institutional buyers. So you're above the single family landlords, but you're below the big institutional investors. And so it's kind of like a sweet spot for investors like us who are not funded by big hedge funds, but we have access to capital from our financial friends and from our group, our community, and other investors like us. And so you can kind of pool your resources together and buy these relatively good sized properties for an individual, but they're just way too small for the big institutions.
How did you personally find that sweet spot in the market?
The way I found the sweet spot in the marketplace for multifamily properties was by starting off with single family and just wearing myself out managing single family properties. I wanted to build a portfolio that could cover my living expenses and build wealth, but you need a ton of units to be able to do that. I just didn't think I could sustain the management headache it takes to manage 40 or 50 units spread out over multiple counties where I live. So instead, I thought I would go bigger, buy a 200 unit apartment complex and get everything I needed in one place. Problem is I got outbid. I couldn't take one of those things down by myself, and I couldn't bid enough to actually win the deal in the first place. And so I found this kind of like this 15 to 50 unit threshold is kind of the sweet spot for just individual investors. I would ask the big buyers, like, what is your buy box? And they would say anything under the 75 units, we just don't even bother. If it's under $10 million, it's just not worth it to us. I was like, okay, well, I wonder who is buying these 15, 40 units, 36 units, 44 units type of properties. The kind of people who tend to buy those are mom and pop operators. And then I noticed that there's this big wealth transfer happening with the silver tsunami, where the boomers are basically aging out of the workforce, and they have collected quite a bit of wealth. A lot of it's in small businesses and real estate assets. I thought, well, how about I make offers to them using owner financing, eliminate the banks entirely, and actually save them in taxes, and then I can get into deals for less down payment. And so it is a way for me to kind of leverage up into a better asset than single family that scales faster, and it's easier to manage because they're all in one place, while also helping solve the problems for the seller.
So take me back to where Vera started. What was she doing before it clicked?
So when Vera got started looking for properties, she started with these 100 and 200 unit properties, and she was looking to syndicate or do a syndication and pool investors into what they call a syndicate and buy a property where she was going to be the general partner and these passive investors would be the limited partner. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I've done it, and it's a fine strategy. That makes a lot of sense on these bigger assets. But you have to go and find a really good asset that makes sense to raise the capital with to begin with. And when she was trying to do that, she was just being outbid by people who were paying like 3 and 4 or 5 cap of these properties. And I just don't see how the money works when you're buying a property at a 3 or 4 cap. There's no upside, and I guess the big money can afford to get that low of a return because they're not leveraging as much. I don't really know why the numbers work for them. It does not work for us. We cannot go and raise capital when the cap rate is 3, 4, 5%. The numbers do not pencil out. And so that's what she was facing during that year or so, where she was looking for properties and she just couldn't figure out deals that worked. Basically, she was looking at an asset that just wasn't set up to make sense during the current market cycle. And so during right now's market cycle, what works is looking for mom and pop owners that are looking to retire. You offer them an owner financing offer, save them in taxes, save them the hassle of managing their property, and then you can get in for less money, like 10 or 15%. That's what we're seeing working right now.
What happens to people that do everything right but still don't get a good deal?
So what we see very commonly is that there are people who go out and do all the things that we tell them to do, but they make the phone calls, they make the offers, they do the work, but they do it on assets that are not primed in the marketplace right now. And they burn themselves out and they think, this real estate doesn't work. Real estate probably always works in some way, somehow, but it does change based on where you are in the market cycle. And that's just the reality you got to face if you're going to be in the business for very long, is that this is a up and down business, like probably with any business. There are forces at play that are way bigger than you, so you can't really change those. What you can do is adapt to find a strategy that works within the confines of these large economic forces. Some of those being interest rates, what's happening in the larger stock market, what's happening in the jobs market, what's happening with population changes. So right now there's a lot of movement from the coasts to the south and the northeast to the south. Ride that wave. The Sun Belt is a good place to invest. Over time, there will be a countervailing force where people will realize it's maybe not perfect and they want to move back to the north, and maybe you adjust back. The Midwest might be the next big thing. So you kind of pay attention to that sort of thing and see where the deals are. You go and fish where the fish are biting, right? You don't just keep casting the same place thinking, well, this isn't working. You can't change what's happening under the surface of the water. Those forces are bigger than you, but what you can do is you can go find another fishing hole. And that's what we do in the business, is we find another fishing hole.
How much does the real estate market actually change? And can you see it coming?
Yes, real estate is a business that changes constantly. It doesn't really move fast most of the time, with a couple of big notable exceptions. Mostly the real estate market kind of lags behind what's happening in the greater macroeconomic economy scenario. And so you can kind of see it coming in a lot of cases. And so you'll have a seller's market and you'll have a buyer's market. As we're watching this right now, we're kind of in between. It's not really the buyer's market it used to be, but it's not exactly a seller's market either. And so what you do is you're constantly adjusting to what you see happening. And so the things I'm looking for in a given area are, what are the jobs doing? Is there a jobs growth? Are there wages growth? Is the population in the area growing? And if I see that happening, those three things, people are moving there, they're getting jobs, the wages are increasing, then that's usually a pretty good indicator that you can kind of ride the wave. So I look for markets that are doing that, market inside those markets. It's a rising tide lifts all ships scenario. And so I just want to jump in the middle of that. I'm a very small player in the big scheme of things. Most people who invest in real estate are just a small fish. You want to kind of be nimble and dodge in and out of what's happening in the greater macroeconomic environment, because you can see it coming. It's like very clear when interest rates start to go up or interest rates start to go down. Like you can see that trend happening, and so you can kind of adjust your strategy accordingly.
A lot of people freeze when going from single family to commercial. How do you stay confident when talking to brokers who act like big shots?
A lot of people deal with confidence issues in this business, especially when you go from single family to multifamily. You're now in the commercial space, and that term commercial can be a little bit intimidating. And there are people that are very successful and made a lot of money, or they at least act like they've made a lot of money. And you're talking to brokers a lot of cases. They think they're all that in a lot of cases. They have a bit of a chip on their shoulder sometimes. And so how do you deal with that? I just believe that you don't have to pretend to be anything you're not. Hey, I'm an investor. I'm making the transition from single family to multifamily. I see this property you've listed here. I believe it's something that makes sense for me to buy, but I want to make sure it makes sense for me. Can you give me some information so I can put together an offer that makes sense? Here are the three ways we buy, by the way. I'll buy in a cash out scenario. I have access to a lot of hard money lenders that can buy the cash. If I buy the property, cash it out right away. But it's going to be a lump sum up front. It's going to be at a significant discount. Or I can take over existing financing if the terms are favorable. We can use that debt as assets and give the seller a little higher offer. Or our favorite way to buy properties is if they will take their payments over time. Basically do a seller financing scenario where we can give them a much higher price. We can give them a down payment and then they can take the payments over time. Is any one of the three ways something that your seller would be open to or not? Or am I just wasting my time? And I do some version of that. I can't tell you how many times a day talking to sellers and brokers. I go through that script, that approach, and I see, is this seller have a broker, or does this broker have a seller who is willing to dance? I want a good dance partner. If they're open to negotiation, I can often find them an offer that makes sense for them.
So once she found a deal she couldn't buy alone, how did she actually put it together?
So the thing about commercial real estate oftentimes is a team sport. Really difficult to do this business as a lone wolf. It's not likely you're going to buy a $2, $3, $4, $5 million property completely by yourself. If you have the capacity to do so, I encourage you to go forth and do so. That's just not the case most people are in. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to find a good deal, and then we're going to raise capital to help take the property down. And so the case of Vera, she found a property, let's just talk about the Dallas property. It's a 20-unit apartment complex that she found a seller who lived in California, had a 20-unit apartment complex in Dallas, didn't enjoy the management process of owning real estate, and they just wanted to move on. And they were having trouble selling that property. And so what they were able to do was negotiate with Vera a owner financing scenario where she gave them a 10 or 15% down payment, I can't remember exactly. The balance was going to be paid off and amortized over the next 5 or 10 years. And that was at a 3% interest rate. After 5 years, there will be a balloon payment that's due, but during those 5 years, Vera can improve the property. She can get it leased up properly, get it rehabbed, and stabilize the property, then refinance or sell in 5 years. And what that does for the seller is it gets them out of the hassle of having to manage the property. And now Vera has negotiated a scenario where she got 3% interest in a market where you can't find interest rates below 7%. It's like, how does she do it? Well, she asked for it, right? It's like, she said, hey, I can do this deal. I'll give you the price that you want, but I will need a seller financing terms. I'll give you 15% down, and it's going to be at 3% interest for 5 years. The seller went for it. You don't get what you don't ask for. That's how you win the business. Make these phone calls and you make these offers and see which one lands. They will not all land. Let's just be really, really honest. They will not all land, but you won't get it unless you ever go out there and ask.
What number matters least in an owner financing offer?
So when you're making an owner financing offer, ask this question real quick. Which of the variables at play do you think is the least important? And it's actually the price of the property. That's the least important variable that I care about. I want to make sure I'm not overpaying for the property. I'll pay a premium, but the least important number is the sales price. And a good example to demonstrate this. If you had a property, a single family house that you thought was worth, say, $500,000, how about I pay you $1 million for it, but it's my terms? Like whatever terms I say, you agree to, but will you accept my $1 million offer? Well, it depends on the terms, right? What if I said I'll pay you $1 per year until paid? That's not a very good deal. I mean, it would take 1,000,000 years for me to pay that off, right? So that's not a very good deal. That's the terms. So the price is the most irrelevant number that I'm looking for. What I really want is I want a minimum down payment. I want a low interest rate, and I want that thing to amortize over so I can pay down what I'm paying for the property as quickly as possible. I want rapid equity pay down. And what that does is it allows me to pay down the value of the property below what it's actually worth in the time that I'm paying off the seller. So I want most of my payment to be going towards principal to the seller, not in interest to the seller. What I'm doing is I'm paying a bit of a premium, and I'm basically front loading the interest inside of the payment, and I'm only paying them a modest amount of interest so that we're not in this kind of imputed interest scenario, but I'm doing a very low interest payment on the front end so that I can pay down things super fast. That's the important detail that I don't think most people understand when they're making seller financing offers.
What do you amortize these deals over, and how do balloon payments work?
So when we're talking about these seller financing deals, a lot of people ask about, oh, well, what is this being amortized for? So we amortize it for however long it makes sense for us to have enough cash flow. So it could be 35 years, it could be 15 years, it could be 50 years. I don't care what the amortization schedule is. We can come up with that however we want. What I really want is to be able to pay down that debt, the balance of that property, as quickly as possible. Someone's not going to sign up for a 40-year mortgage. Of course, I get that. What we do is we impose a balloon payment, meaning that after a 5-year balloon, then I will owe the seller the balance of what's left. So as I'm paying down the principal of the loan, whatever's left at the end of 5 years is what I owe them when I either refinance or sell the property. And this is very common in commercial loans. If you go and get a CMBS type loan or a DSCR loan out in the marketplace, they have balloons built into it oftentimes. So they'll have a 5, 7, 10-year balloon built into it. Meaning at the end of the 5-year or 7-year balloon, then you have to kind of recast the loan. You have to go and get another loan product, or you have to renew at the current interest rates. Whereas I'm dealing with a seller, I don't have to renew at the current interest rates. What I want to do is I want to give them the ability to get their cash out. They don't want to hold the property for this note on this property for the next 10, 20, 30 years like a bank would. Sometimes what you do is they will let you buy the property and then you hold a note for them, seller financing, for a 5, 7, 10-year period. We start at 10 years and we negotiate down to 5 or 7. They want 2 or 3 years, and I can't do that. I can't pay down the principal fast enough. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to get into that 5 to 7, sometimes 8-year time frame. That tends to be enough time for me to pay down the principal balance enough such that I can have equity in the deal when I refinance.
What's the key thing Vera did right on the structure?
The one thing we want to make sure and cover about these owner financing offers that Vera very much followed along with is that she got in light. That's the key here. And what I mean by that is her down payment was fairly modest. When you go to a commercial lender, they're going to want you to put at least 25, sometimes as much as 30 or 40% down payment. They're minimizing their risk. When I talk to a seller, I have a lot more flexibility with them. They want a 40% down payment too, but I can't make the numbers work if I'm going to do a 40% down payment. My cash on cash return just doesn't get there. Like, I want to make a 10, 12, 15% cash on cash return, and I want as little money in the deal as possible because it's less money I have to raise. And so what I do is I go and I negotiate with the seller and say, I can give you a 10% down payment. And they're like, oh, we can't do that. It's like, well, how about a 12% down payment? No, I want a 30. I can't really make that work. And so we might wiggle ourselves way up to maybe as high as 15%. So I'm in that 10 to 15% down payment range for this whole scenario to be able to make sense. Now I want to be able to pay them enough for them to have some pay off their broker, put a little money in their pocket, and I'm going to make them monthly payments for the next 5, 7, 10 years, however long we decided. That needs a seller who's a little bit open to being flexible. If they're not looking to seller finance and they're not open to it, and they maybe say, okay, fine, we'll do seller financing, they might want a 40% down payment. That doesn't work for us. If they're going to be one of our sellers that we work with, I'm going to give them their price, but they're going to have to be really flexible with all the other terms. Because if they dictate the price, the terms, the interest rate, then I might as well not even do the deal. I can't make money. And so here's the real important key when I'm negotiating with the seller is I want to structure this in such a way that it is no doubt that I'm going to be able to make your payment. Because 3 years down the road, you don't want to get a call from me saying, I don't have enough cash flow to make your payment. You want me to be in a good position to be able to make those payments to you. Let's structure this in such a way so that there are no surprises down the road. We have a good, fair arrangement to where I can comfortably make those payments to you.
Did she really raise $1 million? How?
What's really cool about making offers and getting involved in this business, even if your deals don't land, even if your offers don't actually get accepted, you're developing relationships. And so when you do get a deal under contract, people know who you are when you call them. So it makes it easier for you to go and raise capital. And so what Vera did is she was not shy on the phone. She went out there and she did her thing. She met everybody and she talked to everybody. She was consistent. And so she built a network of people. And with that network of people, she was able to raise capital. Your net worth is equal to your network times your ability to solve their problems. What she did is she found people that were in the business, and when she had a deal, she said, hey, did you know that I have a deal? Would you by any chance be interested in hearing about it? Maybe you can be a part of it. I'm looking to raise some capital to do a down payment. Is that something you want to hear about? And so she would host these webinars, like these really informal type webinars where she would just go on a Zoom call and do a little pitch deck, and she would just walk through these deals. And she would make the ask for 250 grand. And she was able to raise over $1 million doing that on a property because the deal was such a compelling deal and she had spent the time developing her network ahead of time. For a lot of people, if you find the first deal, you will often need help raising capital, which is no shame in that. You want a piece of the pie and you go and get other people to bring some capital and you share the pie with them, right? Not a problem with that at all. That's just how you get started in the business.
If you had to name the number one skill you need to succeed in commercial real estate, what is it?
Yeah, if you were to ask me the one skill that you just have to get good enough at in commercial real estate, really any kind of real estate, is that you got to be comfortable making phone calls and negotiating deals on the phone. And I'm not saying you have to be selling anything. You're not in sales, really, because you're offering to buy a property. You're not selling anything. What you're doing is you're finding opportunity in the marketplace, and then you're sharing that opportunity with somebody else. And so what you're really doing is you're trying to get to know people and understand what it is that they're after, what it is that their problems are, what are their pain points, and figuring out how you can perhaps solve a problem for them. That's fundamentally what you're doing at all the times. And your offer now is very specific in that I will buy your property. Mr. Seller, Mr. Broker, I can buy your seller's property, and here's how I can do it. I'm gonna put together a letter of intent with 3 different options to see if any of these make sense for you. Which of these offers is most to your liking? Mr. Broker, Mr. Seller, whoever you're talking to.